My guests today are award-winning writer-director Sam Rudykoff and award-winning producer Mark DeLottinville and their newest short film, the horror comedy Halfway Haunted. Now, Sam is a Toronto-based writer-director, and his previous short film Cruise in 2022 was an official selection at over 75 festivals, including Fantastic Fest, Fantasia, and Seattle International. It was also awarded the Best Canadian Short at the Calgary Underground Film Festival and selected as a Vimeo Staff pick. Now, Mark is an award-winning producer and president of Big Pig Company, and he has won several awards for his work, including Best Canadian Short at the Calgary Underground Film Festival, and his work has premiered at festivals like Fantasia and Hollyshorts, LA Shorts, as well as the London Short Film Festival, Seattle International, and Rhode Island. Now, their newest short film, Halfway Haunted, stars Hanan Yunus from What We Do in the Shadows and Christian Brun from Orphan Black and The Recruit, and of course, starring Sugar Lynn Beard from Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates. So let's welcome Sam Rudykoff and Mark DeLottinville and their horror comedy, Halfway Haunted, to the show. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us here.
Well, I have to say, finally, an original short film that I think this has to be the second one I've seen this year with an actual outside the box story. So, where did the idea come from?
First of all, thank you so much. That's very kind of you to say. Um, I watch a lot of haunted house movies and horror movies, and something that struck me was that usually the ghosts in those movies and the hauntings aren't posing any real danger. You know, it's a lot of hallucinations and sort of spooky time, but it's not usually anything that really is life threatening in and of itself. And I thought, I've dealt with worse homes than this in my time, because if you have bad wiring or plumbing or God forbid a landlord who's predatory, that poses a lot more of an immediate danger than most ghosts seem to in these movies. So I thought it would be fun to imagine a scenario where somebody had to choose between the bad landlord or the bad ghost.
Oh, I love that. Now, Mark, as a producer, what sealed the deal for you to produce it?
Well, I loved the idea from the beginning. Personally, I have been evicted a couple times from predatory kind of coincidences of landlords of that. So when Sam came to me with the story, it was something that I was just absolutely 100% like involved with, because I knew exactly what he was trying to comment on. So it was something that I had personal experience with, and I connected with it immediately. So as soon as he told me, and my eyes lit up, because I knew that there was such a great story just from the beginning.
This short film covers quite a few different subjects in their undertones, such as eviction, gentrification, also issues that many are dealing with today, especially like housing, security, and dealing with the ever changing landscape of developers taking over older neighborhoods. And yet, you give us a horror comedy to showcase those elements. Why?
Um, that's a very good question. I guess ghosts are in a way they're stand-ins for the past. Usually it's a past trauma, but it is just sort of the past in general. And when you have these waves of gentrification and these developers sort of coming in and bulldozing areas, it's not just the houses that are being destroyed. It's the histories and the communities that those homes are part of. So I thought it would be interesting, to sort of get a ghost point of view on that, because usually we think about when you get rid of a ghost, it's with an exorcist or something, but we don't sort of imagine getting rid of the whole context which with the ghost lives in, because you don't hear about haunted condos. It's just they can only exist as long as the past exists. So that was where the ghost element came in. And as for the comedy part, I for one, housing is such. I think it's a topic a lot of people don't really like talking about, and comedy just sort of helps grease the wheels a little bit. And I'm always naturally inclined to write more comedically, so things just sort of went from there.
I really love this film because I watched it multiple times and because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. And Mark, again, for you, when you looked at the script and it was like, okay, it's go time to make this film, what was your biggest challenge in getting it made?
Well, I think with any short film, it comes down to having the funding to be able to do it correctly. A lot of times when people do films, and that actually can apply to feature films as well too, not just shorts. We were very lucky in that we had applied for government funding in Canada. They have different programs here that you can apply to, and we applied for with the Canada Council of the Arts, and we were very lucky enough in order to get the grant to be able to do it. Without that, I just don't think it would have been possible for us to execute well basically what was on the page and do it justice. I think one of the things I loved about the script was that I loved it so much that I felt like, are we going to be able to make this as good as the script is of that? And that was something where I was really worried about. But having that funding and being very lucky and incredibly generous from the granting council, we had the budget to be able to do it correctly and, have the cast and have the crew and all that kind of thing with it. So, coming from a producing background and having doing productions, for my, I would say my day job of that, I knew what would be needed to do this correctly, just in terms of like a sum of that. And we were able to get that. And I think we did exceed except my expectations of what we were able to accomplish with the script. So I think the hardest part is always having the money to do it correctly. And we were just lucky enough that we had that.
And you nailed it because when I watched this film, there is so much to it in the production side of it that, I mean, you literally brought this whole thing to life and it shows. I mean, this is a stellar short film. And for both of you, yeah, here you are, you created a horror comedic short film, something that we need more of. But this film is funny because it has dark moments, but they never seem dark because there's this layer of humor that you can't ignore. So when there's a dark moment, you end up with a smile on your face. So for you, Sam, how did you visualize the balance of horror and comedy?
Um, I think it started with sort of not thinking in terms of genre so much as just making sure um, that all the characters felt real and relatable, and like real people, because I did want the show to or the movie to feel like it was taking place in the real world, because it's dealing with an issue that is so sort of present right now. So when you lean too far into genre, you lose that realism. Um, so keeping it sort of centered in between a few things, but really just focusing on what the characters wanted and what they were doing to get those things sort of guided the tone. We were also incredibly lucky that our cast was phenomenal. It was really important to us to cast people with really strong comedy backgrounds. I always say that you can always have a comedic actor tone it down, but it's very hard to have a person who's not funny suddenly become funny. So we had people who had, a lot of experience with comedy, both film and live comedy. So we were sort of able to dial in on what the right balance should be on set, and try different things, and kind of find those walls where the tone felt right, and where maybe it was dipping too far in one direction or another.
Yep. With all three characters, and I hope the audience really notices this, but all three characters, they want something. And and I'm not going to give any spoilers away on this film, but they all three want something, but not everybody's going to get what they really wanted. And there's this, I guess, this silent tug of war within this short film amongst all three of them. But then that tug of war, they just end up colliding. And and I think that's part of the magic because I love short films where the cast is really small. It allows the audience to focus on each of the characters and see what they bring to the story. And you did that perfectly in this film. But there's something that caught my eye, and I just want to bring it up. It may not be all that important to some people, but I just loved it because this should have been a feature film in my book. And I say that because at the 90-second mark at the beginning, the title appears on screen like a feature film. I absolutely loved it. I know it's not a big deal to a lot of people, but not one short film that I've seen this year has ever done that move. So I love that because it was like you're about to watch something really cool. And you already get the sense that there's a little bit of humor in it. But on top of that title coming in, you also had an incredible music bed. And I have to ask, did your composer, Erica, I guess it's Procunier, I hope I pronounced that right. Did she write that cool song?
She is phenomenally talented, but that was not something she came up with. No, that was a song that we licensed. Yeah.
Well, it was a perfect song at the beginning and, of course, towards the end of the film. So there was just so much magic within the first 2 minutes of the film. And I think the way that you did it, you set the tone. And the audience is like ready to go. They're like, okay, what's going to happen next? And it really comes down to the casting, which was absolutely excellent. You had Hannah Eunice, who plays Jess the tenant, unemployed, looking at losing the house that she's renting. Then you have Christian Brune, one of my favorite actors, which I loved in The Recruit, who plays the ghost. And then you have Sugar Lynn Beard, which I actually recognized, and she plays that bubbly, doesn't care if I kick you out in the street realtor. So how did you get such a stellar cast?
Well, we got very lucky to begin with. And Mark has a great casting agent that he works with named Ian Bender. And he liked the script a lot and was willing to go to bat for it with a couple agents and really push it forward. And we were very lucky that the people that we wanted said yes.
Wow. I mean, how long did it take you to actually get all three actors?
I think it took us maybe a month or two from sort of scoping them out to getting them on board. Um, yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, let me ask you, Sam, since you directed this amazing film and working with those three incredible actors, uh, I mean, from your point of view, were they easy to direct?
No, they were awful. No, they were all an absolute joy to work with. I should have mentioned I've known Hannon actually for over 10 years because I met her through my co-writer on the short film Bryn Potty. He was in a sketch comedy duo with her many years ago called Definition of Knowledge. I believe they have an album on Spotify. It's very funny. So she was somebody who I knew and I knew was very talented from the beginning. Christian Sugar, I had never met before, and I was very lucky that they were incredibly accommodating and easy to work with. They were all very enthusiastic about the rehearsal process. Again, finding that tone. For Sugar, especially playing a villain was something that I think she was just phenomenal at, because she has this very bubbly personality that isn't typically used for darker characters, but for us it was really perfect.
Yeah, she really balanced that out in this film. And it's funny that you said that she's the villain, because most people would think that Christian playing the ghost would become the villain, but he really wasn't playing that role. Now, as a director, when you are working with three actors that know comedy, and I understand when a director is doing a film that's completely dramatic, it's drama. But with comedy and you're filming the scenes, I mean, how does that work when you're trying to find, not that they're trying to, no, how, when you're directing these actors in a comedy, how do you find that comedic tone where it's almost like we've got the shot? Because it's delivering in a much different way than a drama. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Um, it's a few things. First of all, again, the cast just deserves so much of the credit for being so funny and having such a solid handle on comedic delivery and timing. And one giveaway is always if people on set are laughing and trying to hold in their laughter. You've probably got something. And the rest of it is, I mean, this is such a boring answer, but a lot of it really is gut feeling. I did stand up for a number of years. Comedy has always been part of my life in some way or another. So there is always that thing where you think, oh gosh, I hope this works, because you don't always know. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the editing, because that's where you can really dial in on the timing, adding in little reactions, and make a joke sort of perfect in editing. Comedy is almost all timing, so editing plays a big part. But none of that happens without a cast who knows how to give you the raw materials.
So, which is more difficult, delivering the funny on stage or delivering the funny in front of the camera?
Oh, I think they're. I mean, I've never acted much, so I couldn't say. I think probably in front of a camera, because when you're performing comedically in a live environment, you're setting the terms. Whereas when you're trying to make some stupid writer or director's jokes work for them, I think that's probably a greater challenge. But these guys really nailed it.
So, did you give the actors some freedom uh, with the script in doing their scenes?
Yeah, some. It was, as you noted, there was sort of a feature's worth of story in this thing. So we weren't able to let them sort of totally riff as much as they probably would have liked, and as much as I would have liked, to be honest, just because we did have a lot to get through. But I always want actors to be able to try stuff and sort of feel it out in the moment. So I would say it was sort of about 80-20 as far as improvisation goes.
So, how would you describe Hannon's character?
Um, she is somebody who is just trying to make it work. And I think that's something that sort of gets lost when we talk about gentrification, because obviously there's the cultural aspect and the financial aspect, but what is the problem is that you need affordable housing, not just because it's a human right, but because people need somewhere to start. Communities are made of people who start businesses, who have kids, who chase ambitions. And if somebody doesn't have a place to live, or if they're spending all their money on rent, none of those things can happen, and you don't have the people who make a community. So, I wanted her to just sort of be somebody who just wanted to, what everyone wants, which is, to work in a field that they enjoy, and to not have to worry constantly about whether or not they'll have a roof over their head. So, um, intentionally, we sort of didn't want to give her too much baggage. We really just wanted to focus on her sort of, just wanting what everyone wants, and reacting to all the things that were getting in her way.
I love the scene with Hannon on the sofa. She's making these phone calls. She's now she's in the position of like, I've got to find a place to live. And so she's on the phone, and I'm listening to her dialogue, and it really shows her vulnerability. That's the core right there about who she is. And I felt so bad because not one person on the other end of the phone showed her any grace, didn't show her any respect whatsoever. And in a way, for me, it's almost a little bit of heart crushing, because you're like, give the woman a break. But nobody was willing to do that. So you placed her character, you backed her into the corner, not only with the people on the phone she was talking to, but with the ghost, as well as with the realtor. So I love that whole scenario that you created for her. And then you have Christian Brune, who plays the ghost. And Mark, feel free to jump in here. How would you describe his character?
I'm gonna let Mark jump in if he wants to.
Either one of you could jump in on this one.
Just his character in general of that?
Yeah. I mean, how, for the audience, how would you describe the ghost character?
I would say that the ghost he's not quite honest in terms of what his real intentions are of that with it, but he is his goal is still the same regardless of what his intentions may be of that. So I would say that, what's interesting about his character, and you kind of brought it up earlier with Sugar, of like, who is the real villain in this, right, of that with it, and it kind of explores that as the film goes on. And I would say that he is a very charming two-sided character of that with him.
Yeah, I found him cynical, sarcastic, selfish, neurotic, and a liar. But
Unfortunately, yes. And Christian, one of the reasons that we cast him is he is so good at playing some sort of darker traits and emotions, but with a lighter touch. I loved him in Ready or Not, where of course he's one of the villains. So he was perfect for sort of bridging that gap between, obviously the ghost, like Mark said, the story is about her deciding who the lesser evil is. And so, he can't just be totally friendly, but we wanted to make sure he could still make a case for himself as a potential ally. And Christian has this incredible way of walking that line. So he was just fantastic.
yeah, his whole acting in this film comes across so natural. When you watch him deliver his lines, it just comes out of him so easy. So directing him must have been a joy for you, especially with him playing the ghost character.
Oh yeah, he was a total pro. We talked a few times before we got started about the character. Uh, he puts a lot of thought into his work, and building out these characters. So I would love to work with him again someday, and I hope he feels the same way.
I noticed for a short film, there are quite a few special effects. Um, did you use a person in a chroma key suit for some of the special effects? And which special effect was the most challenging to pull off?
By far, the most challenging was towards the end of the film. There's some business with a grave being dug in a basement, and it turns out you can't just dig up somebody's basement for your movie. So um, we were, like many filmmakers, we wanted to do everything practically, and we were debating really up until the week of the shoot, if we could build a false floor and dig a hole in that. But then it turned out Christian was too tall to make that work. So ultimately, we used a digital matte painting. So it was done in post, but in sort of an old fashioned way. Um, but figuring that out also meant that we had to really pick our spots for when that would appear on screen, because of course VFX shots are expensive, and we couldn't have too many. So that was probably the most challenging effect in the film. There wasn't any use of green screen, though. We did a lot of plates where we would shoot the background, and then we would shoot people in front of it, and we would layer those things together. But mostly we did things practically, and the scenes where things are obviously not practical were mostly done just with sort of old fashioned compositing.
Oh, that's really cool. Now, Mark, when you're looking at the script and you realize that there has to be some special effects in this film, from the producing side, what was going through your mind? Because, like you said earlier, you want to bring this film alive just like you saw it in the script.
Well, I think the great thing about the script is that a lot of the effects that Sam had mentioned, like they all could be done in a practical manner, So, for example, floating a beer bottle is actually really easy to do, from a practical standpoint, or moving the magnets on the fridge. It was as simple as just like shooting a plate and then having like a magnet basically taped with like green tape on a stick, and then having that just be cut out in post. So we were used to doing those type of effects, but what was good is that we wrote the effects so that it was accomplishable on the day, and something that wouldn't break the bank essentially of that. So aside from the floor, which we found a cost effective way to do it in the end, uh really all the other effects were very easy to do because we knew going into them that they had been written in a way that they could be executed practically. So it wasn't something where I was too worried about, because when we when we did them or executed them, we had done those types of things before for other jobs, for other films of that nature. So it was something very easily to accomplish, and something I knew that would still look great on screen but not cost a lot of money.
Now, I don't want to give too much away because when people see this film, I want them to experience it just like I did, because I know everyone who's going to see this film is going to fall in love with it. But I have to ask, the scene with Jess where the ghost says, "Look, I got a plan," and so he enters her body. How did you pull that scene off? Because when she answers the door, I'm looking at it like, how did they pull that off? So can you give us a little bit of a secret how you did that with her?
Um, Again, you hire somebody who can do it. Hannon is in mostly a more high key comedic actor. So she uh, has, in fact, with her, I think she would say the biggest challenge for her was dialing things down, because she's so good at taking things up. And So she sort of already had the sort of physical acting skills to do that, and so she loved the idea. We did have to rehearse it a bit, and editing it to make all the continuity work was definitely a job. But really, she was, I could say, make sure your head is moving like this and your arm is moving like this, and she could do it because she's just that good, and I'm so glad that she was.
That was all her for that scene?
Yeah, well, it was her and Christian. Yeah, yeah, they
Well, I knew
just
the part where Christian was behind her because that's what threw me off. Because when I was looking at him, I'm like, okay, I know he's behind her in that shot, and then I kept thinking, okay, then the other shot, does that mean there's somebody holding her up wearing a chroma key suit? But if she pulled that off by herself, my gosh, that was stellar. That was stellar acting.
she's a stellar actor. Yeah, I mean, it was there was a lot of we knew that we'd have to capture some options to sort of sell in the effect and the continuity of it. So we had we had her do a bunch of things so that when we got into the edit we could say, okay, well, this feels sort of like it clicks in with this piece, and we sort of built the scene from there. But yeah, the all the credit goes to her.
See, I really, and I also like and during that sequence, I'll just say that during that sequence in the film, there's also that black and white sequence, and that's all I'm going to call it because again, I don't want to give anything away. But in that black and white sequence, the thing that got to me was I was sitting there watching it, and it didn't dawn on me till about the third time that I watched the film. I'm like, wait a minute. That's like being caught in a dream or a nightmare, and you're fighting, you're trying to fight your way out, or you're trying to cause yourself to wake up to get rid of the nightmare. And I thought, that is the only scene I've ever seen somebody pull off and give us the idea of what that actually feels like or what it actually looks like. So that whole sequence of the scenes, that was just stellar work because when I watched it, I'm like, oh, I know how that feels. So good job.
Thank you. Yeah, it was it came about. There's a fair amount of exposition mixed in with the action, and figuring out how to parcel out that information in the middle of all this stuff that's happening was what sort of led to that idea. It was as much necessity as it was creativity.
So how many days did it take you to film the short?
We shot over 4 days.
Okay, that's cool. That's pretty average for most short films. Now, with the Hollyshorts Film Festival, is this where you're making your official premiere?
It is.
So how does that feel?
It feels great. They're a festival that we've always had our eye on. I've never had a film there before. A film that Mark and myself produced a year or two ago did go, but I wasn't able to make the trip for that. So I'm really looking forward to being there. It feels like every year they get bigger and bigger. I know this year they have some really hot shorts playing. And they've always done a great job of programming, very topical, relevant stuff, and providing a really great platform for people who have things to say. I hope that that means we've accomplished what we set out to do.
Well, I know if I looked at this festival, if I look at this year's Holly Shorts compared to last year, I think the films this year are even better. And I love Holly Shorts. I think it's one of my favorite short film festivals. Like you said, they know how to put on the perfect film festival. Now, with Halfway Haunted, what block are you going to be shown in?
We are going to be in the horror block, which I'm really looking forward to. Horror fans are the best fans there are. We have I think a 10 p.m. showing next Friday, and yeah, we'll be there with all the horror heads.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I was kind of wondering on what block you were going to be placed in, because now with the horror block, are you competing against others that may be, let's say, a more serious art form of horror?
I have a feeling. So I believe we are either first or quite early in the block, and I think we might be there as sort of an amuse bouche before the heavy stuff comes in. So I think that we might be sort of the light one. I looked briefly at some of the other titles that we're playing with, and at least from the descriptions, I think most of them are not comedic. Yeah, I wasn't sure where we would be either, but I hope the horror fans enjoy it.
Well, I know that they will, because I love this film, and I and it was so funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who's really big in the film industry, and we got on the subject of short film topics, and he goes, "You know what we need more of?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "We need more horror, but we need more horror comedy shorts because it's something that we don't see a whole lot of." So I'm thinking now that if you are the lighter version within the block, I think you may do very well, because that means you're going to stand out if everybody else is, well, dead serious.
Well, I certainly appreciate your confidence. So
Well, so now that you're kicking it off in a very grand way at Hollyshorts Film Festival, and that when the audiences do see it, what would you like for them to take away from the film?
well, I mean, first of all, that they hopefully had a great time watching it. But beyond that, like I said, the film does deal with the current housing crisis that we're in, and like I mentioned, sort of at the top of the interview, I think one of the reasons it's so bad is that people who aren't experiencing it really would just rather act like it isn't happening. Because if you are somebody who has never dealt with housing insecurity, um, it's not very much fun to think about being homeless. And not that this movie is making it fun, but it is something that I think more people could and should be thinking about, and thinking about sort of not necessarily the blame that they share, but just sort of their place in this socioeconomic moment that we're in, because I don't think most people are malicious, but I do think they can be a little apathetic, and I hope that seeing the story can at least sort of jostle a few thoughts loose, hopefully, and make people just think about the issue a little more day to day.
Yeah, you have a very serious point there. And I've had this discussion with other filmmakers that kind of bring up the subject of gentrification, where you have these not necessarily historic neighborhoods, but you have neighborhoods in which people have grown up through, let's say, 3, 4 generations. And it takes that one developer that moves in and changes the landscape forever. Now, I live north of Houston, Texas, and the perfect example is there are areas of the city in which you could probably say that before housing got to be extremely expensive, you would probably see homes around, let's say, 75,000, maybe 125, and they were affordable for the people that were living in the neighborhood. Then you get that one developer moving in, starts buying up the property, and then they replace them with homes that are in the $600,000 range. And the thing is you can't go back. and it destroys the neighborhood. And like all of us have seen in the news for the past few years, there are cities in which it's like people out of California are moving out. They're going to Texas, they're going to Florida and other states, and all of a sudden we're seeing this big change in real estate to where it was once affordable and now it's not. And we're even seeing young people. And then in your film Halfway Haunted, you have Jess who is single, and even though she has to find another place to live, not that she's going to go out and buy a home, but even apartments have gotten to be to the point to where your monthly rent would equal a house payment. So you kind of secretly show that in this film. So yeah, this is a horror comedy, but there is some serious issues that we all need to discuss outside of that.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. It is, people get displaced, and when that happens, they need somewhere to go, and if they don't have somewhere to go, you wind up with a very bad outcome, and that's what we're seeing, unfortunately. And like I said, I don't think that these developers are even really thinking about this. They are just very narrow minded, and they see money to be made, but there's a real human cost to it. So it's something that I think you're already seeing a lot of very sad outcomes, and hopefully there's a bit of a wake up call at some point.
Well, both of you are from Toronto, which is really becoming one of the major, if not already, major film capitals of the world. Are you also seeing a problem in the areas of gentrification?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I moved here from New York about 12 or 13 years ago, largely because it was a very affordable place to be, and New York wasn't at the time. And now, it's still not as bad as New York City, but it's not far off. Rents have really skyrocketed. When I was in my early 20s, I was able to find an apartment with a roommate and live a pretty comfortable life on an entry level salary. Today, I work at an advertising agency in my other life, and I have a lot of young early 20s employees, and they all live at home because they can't even afford a place with a roommate. It's a totally different world than it was, and that's just in a decade, that somebody just starting out in their career, suddenly now has to live in their parents' basement, and it's unfortunate, and it has ripple effects. So yeah, Toronto is definitely very much a city where this is happening. I think most major urban centers are. Yeah.
Yeah, and for you, Mark, when you looked at the script and you saw some of the elements that come forth in this film, I mean, um, how long have you been in Toronto?
I've been in Toronto for about 15 years now. It was about almost 14 years. So 2011 is when I moved in of that. But yeah, what Sam says is exactly correct. I think one thing we're noticing even more is that it's not just metropolitan centers that are having this issue, is that you're seeing other places move out to wherever it might be, like that surround major cities, that also become unaffordable as well too. So a lot of people might not be able to live downtown of that, but they could think of, oh, I can live in Toronto. There's a GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. They could live in a smaller town outside the city and commute in. But now the problem is that you have so many people who can't afford rent downtown, so they move into these other areas, and then of course increase the amount of money and amount of costs of these areas go up in value of that for properties, so they become also unaffordable. So it's one of those things where it's kind of one thing begets another, and then all of a sudden you have essentially generations that aren't able to grow up in communities, and then all of a sudden a city, 30 years from now doesn't have any younger people living in it because no one can afford to live there.
Yeah, that's what happened to many of the areas outside of Houston. People want to get out of the city, which I completely understand. We did the same thing 6 years ago. But then when you move outside the city and you're thinking, oh, I can have a breath of fresh air and breathe. There's not that many people here. But unfortunately, that type of disease spreads, and then housing uh, from either from homes to apartment prices become out of reach. And yes, I mean, we're seeing not only 20 years old at home, we're seeing even some in their early 30s the same way, because it's so hard to move out and start your own life. And here in America, of course, you know this now too, that it's hard to reach for the American dream like it used to be, because it's not the 1950s anymore.
Yeah, and that's another thing. It's very generational. Uh, you know, my generation, I think, I'm very solidly a millennial. Um, I think we're going to be the first cohort that is less upwardly mobile than our parents. It's and it sucks coming to grips with that, because we were sort of brought up with this idea that, as long as you do what you're supposed to do, yeah, you can go buy a house when you're an adult. um, and that wasn't considered this outrageous dream that was going to break the bank. It was just part of growing up, was being able to do that. And it does feel like, sort of like we were promised this future that just isn't going to happen, because it's, and obviously people still can make it work, but it's by no means something you can take for granted, the way that, certainly, I remember in the 90s, it felt like people did. Um, so yeah, there's and that in itself, I think, has bred a lot of bitterness and anxiety among young people, which leads to all sorts of other issues, because you look, for the last 100 years, it always seemed like people were doing better than their parents, and now, for the first time in a while, it seems like we're going to be doing a little worse, and it's not great.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that we may need to get a bunch of Christian Bruins into a lot of these places and start haunting them.
You and me both.
I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, Halfway Haunted is about a broke tenant teaming up with the ghost haunting her apartment to fight a ruthless developer trying to erase their home and the history it holds. Set against the backdrop of mass eviction and gentrification, Halfway Haunted flips the haunted house trope on its head, where the ghost isn't the threat but the last line of resistance. It's a dark comedy with a bite, blending horror, satire, and social commentary into a timely story about housing insecurity, community, and survival. Everything about this film screams, I want it to be a feature film, and I would love to see it grow into one. Then you have the case of Hannah Eunice, Christian Brune, and Sugar Lynn Beard. They were absolutely perfect in this film. They are all opposites, but that's what creates the synergistic comedy in this film. The comedic timing is perfect. The storyline moves along so effortlessly because the cast literally brings it to life. And if you are attending Hollyshorts Film Festival, be sure to be in the theater for the horror block to see this film on the silver screen. I promise you, you will laugh and laugh. And I want to thank both of you, Sam and Mark, for sharing this awesome short film with me today, and much success to you and your team.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on your way to work on Spotify, iTunes, and Audible, and more. And hey, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.